good afternoon. And this is BIO211 COVID-19 Labs, years 2020. Woohoo! And we're going to be looking at muscles and how they work and which ones you need to learn. So you're getting this in place of the introductory lecture that would happen before lab. And I'm hoping you guys actually look at it during your spring break. I think with the confusion with the school closing and all of that, we probably need to think about how we're learning the material. And what I'm going to recommend is you spend some small amount of time with the material regularly and not just think about, I need to get to class, try to pay attention, maybe learn the material at the last minute. Because one way or another, you're going to want to be able to demonstrate you've learned this stuff. And I'm trying to come up with some creative ways to do it, and hopefully this will help. So let's get to it. Okay. So if we're thinking about what they do, what do muscles do? And you see LES, it's spelled wrong. Sorry about that, guys. You can see here that we're looking at as the right arm of your patient, and you can see that its job is to create some form of effort against a load, the load being the weight of whatever the object is. Imagine it's a textbook, imagine it's a rock, makes no difference. And that effort and load need to be stabilized. So there's going to be this construction of an origin and an insertion, an origin and an insertion, and this is your biceps brachii muscle, and they've reflected all the other muscles out of the way for you. So you can see here at the distal end of the humerus and the proximal end of the radius, you can see how they're actually articulating. Now, how this is all going to work, or what would happen, what would be different if this is a leg. Now imagine this is, say, the femur, and this is the femur. You're pulling, say, your heel towards your posterior, right? And what you'd be doing is now the large muscle groups would be doing almost exactly the same thing. Only the origins and the insertions are going to be at different locations. If this is the femur, then this makes this the tibia, okay? And you're going to see how things are actually going to move. So how does Mother Nature actually make all of this happen? Well, you can see here that what she's going to do is she's going to create an ability to shorten the distance between 2 points. And so earlier here, this was our biceps brachii, and you could see that it's moving in this general direction. But remember a moment ago, I pointed out to you that there's an origin. Let's put an origin in here for you. O. And there's going to be an insertion down here, an I. And when I say what's going to happen is you're going to shorten the distance between 2 points, what you're actually looking at is you're pulling these 2 points together. So you're shortening the distance between all of the fibers. Notice I just said there are fibers inside of the musculature. Likewise, if we're thinking about what's actually happening here, inside, say, the gastrocnemius, as you're pivoting off the big toe mound of your foot, the actual weight or load is going in gravity, but the effort is still lifting your body up off of the ground. And this is you right here, where you're looking at a series of muscles that are attached here. Remember, this is the occipital bone in the base of the skull. Okay, and you're going to be traveling down here into the different facets of the spinal cord, where these muscles now allow you to fight against gravity as it's pulling your head forward. These each have specific names, and inside chapter 11 we're going to tell you this is a first class lever, a second class lever, and a third class lever. When we cover that material, what we're going to want you to learn is where is the effort relative to the fulcrum, where is the fulcrum relative to the load, where is the fulcrum, how is the effort applied, and what is the load actually doing here. In most cases here, notice the load itself is either the mass of the structure or the mass and the amount of, say, gravitational force that are being pulled on it. So this is sort of an introduction to say that, look, for all muscles inside of your body, they have this really basic idea. They're going to shorten the distance between 2 points. Now my job here is to make sure you learn how does it actually work, and that's what you're going to see here. So here's a belly, and it's going to be a brachioradialis muscle across the anterior surface of the arm when it's reflected incorrectly. This is not in correct anatomical position, so this would actually be the posterior of the arm if you're looking at it. And what I want you to see here is for this to actually attach to bone, we have to use these things that are called tendons. Okay? Now, you can't actually see how they're formed, but I'm going to teach you how they actually attach. And what I want to do is I want to start all the way down here. Remember a moment ago I said that there are fibers, and fibers will contract to shorten the distance between 2 points. Well, those fibers are made up of filaments that are inside of a myofibril. Notice myofibril. Okay, and you're going to see that all of these can be packed together inside of a single muscle cell. Okay, but lining the outside of this muscle cell is this layer that's called an endomysium. And then what Mother Nature does, by making sure that they're highly vascularized and neuronally activatable, she's going to surround these individual endomysium covered structures with a perimysium. Okay? So each one of these has their own endomysium. You bundle them all together inside of a perimysium, and then you bundle all of these together. Okay, so each of these represents one of these. Okay, and then what you actually have is you have an epimysium surrounding it. And here's the tricky part. For us to actually have an origin and insertion, the tendon of the muscle, which is made up now of the epimysium, perimysium, and endomysium, for each of these structures, is now what's actually pulling on that origin and that insertion. Okay? Once you get that idea, now I can teach you how it is Mother Nature is going to make sure that each of the cells is regulatable. So it's told, you tell it when to shorten the distance between 2 points. And how we do that can be seen here. The blue line surrounding this entire cell structure is the cell membrane of a single muscle skeletal fiber. And we're going to call it a sarcolemma. And what it does is the sarcolemma invaginates into these structures that are called transverse tubules. And we're going to modify some cytoplasmic structures we saw back in chapter 3. And you're going to see here that the sarcoplasmic reticulum was once the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and it's going to have a series of gates that allow materials to move in and out. Remember back in chapter 3, we have gates on the outside of the cell. Now you're learning you have gates inside of the cell as well. You're going to see that every skeletal muscle cell is actually the fusion of multiple cells, and that's why all skeletal muscle fibers are multinucleated. They have lots of mitochondria. Okay, and remember back from chapter 3, we said that your skeletal muscle tissues can store glycogen. Remember, glycogen is the polymer of glucose. So the new thing I want to show you here is this thing that's called myoglobin, and myoglobin can actually bind and store oxygen. Okay, and what this means is if we have more myoglobin inside of our skeletal muscle cells, it means they're going to store oxygen for when this actually contracts. And you'll see how it contracts right now. The individual contractile unit inside of a muscle cell is called a sarcomere, and it doesn't matter if it is skeletal muscle or cardiac muscle. You're going to see there's a slightly different structure inside of smooth muscle, but it works pretty much the same way. By creating an immovable location, a Z-disc, and having a second immovable location, a Z-disc, we will attach thin filaments and thick filaments that will then pull on one another. And by pulling on one another, you then shorten the distance between 2 points. And I'll just put an A and a B here. And that A and that B are what's actually now pulling on the cell membrane. And remember what was around the cell membrane a moment ago? Remember, that was the endomysium. And that's all going to come down to one location, which will then mix with the perimysium. Cool. And then it's going to mix with the epimysium to pull on either the origin or the insertion. Okay? Now, we're not interested in the physiology of what's going on in here right now. That's a different lecture. But I want you to see if this is shortening the distance between 2 points, it's actually attached to that membrane protein through this other protein here called dystrophin. I don't think dystrophin's on your lab material, so I'm not going to worry about it here. But I do want you to see that if I put together a model, or we find a model of thin filaments, thick filaments, and I'm sure we have them someplace, okay, I'm going to show you images of what they look like. Okay. Cool. So before I move on, just want to review. This is an individual skeletal muscle fiber. This is the sarcolemma. Here are the contractile units, which are made up of sarcomeres. And you can see the repeating pattern here. So you see that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of sarcomeres inside of a myofibril. We store oxygen with myoglobin. We have glucose available to us should we need it. And we know the glucose is going to go to those mitochondria. So is it the same for all skeletal, smooth, and cardiac muscle fibers? Well, inside lab, we'd have you look at the different slides, okay? Skeletal muscle fiber, cardiac muscle fiber, and smooth muscle fiber. And you've seen at least skeletal and smooth muscle fibers in the lab so far. You haven't seen cardiac muscle fiber. I will pull up slides for you guys to look at. I'll put another presentation together so you can actually see what they look like. Now, inside chapter 11, we're going to go through actually 10 it looks like. We're going to go through how these guys all function slightly differently. But right now I need you to see something really simple. Linear, angular, sort of linear. Multinucleated, single nucleated, single nucleated. You want to make sure when you're thinking about how I'm going to tell what one cell is versus the other, you can see these characteristics. So if that's the case, is it all the same for all muscle cells? The answer is no. But the answer is yes if you're thinking about the fact that they actually have to contract. Now, how many muscle cells are there in the body? 631 in total. Don't worry, you don't need to learn 631. I think maybe we have you learn 25, and we don't even have you learn all the information you really should be learning if this is what you want to go into for a living. You're going to see here part of the table inside of your lab handout. So here's a masseter, sternocleidomastoid, diaphragm, external intercostals, rectus abdominis, external oblique. And what I want you to be able to do is go back into that figure you just saw here and be able to simply to identify these. Okay? You're going to see I'm going to pull up either legs or arms or torsos, and you're going to have to be able to identify what they are on these. So what do we need you to know? Well, remember I said there's this thing that's called an origin. You need to see that there's a thing that's called an insertion, and you can see that there's an action. Elevates the mandible to close the jaw as you chew, as in chewing. So the masseter muscle is on the zygomatic arch, which is why you needed to know where that zygomatic arch was, and you needed to know where the mandible was. Now, the person who put this table together, they didn't believe in details. I'd like you to go back into your textbook and see how much more detail there is between this really simplistic, but definitely useful. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying not to learn this. I'm saying you need to learn this. Okay, and then what we'll do is take a look. So here's that masseter muscle right there. So the origin is the zygomatic bone up here, the mandible down here, and you actually have so you have bilateral masseter muscles on the jaw, and this is how you actually move your jaw. Here's one you're not expecting to see. Here's your sternocleidomastoid. Remember that mastoid process on the temporal bone? Okay, in this figure here, they cut it off on the left-hand side, but on the right-hand side, you can see how it travels down to the clavicle and the sternum. And that's how you want to actually learn these things. And if I'm you, unless I definitely know I did it, the more I needed to learn these, not only do you figure out where they are generally inside of the body, because you know fine well I'm not going to give you a picture just like this, you should be able to palpate the muscles on your own body so you can remember where they are. Let's take a look at another couple. Let's take a look here at the rectus abdominis. Here's an example of something that you're not expecting. Here's a rectus abdominis, and you have multiple bilateral bellies of muscle that are held together. You're going to see that you actually have these tendinous insertions. These tendinous insertions act as the origins and insertions depending upon where you are. Okay, so if we have this first grouping up here, maybe it's attached to the actual bones of the rib cage, okay, here, but the insertion is going to be this tendinous insertion. So now the origins for this one are here and the insertions are there, then the origins for this one are here. You get the point as you actually travel the whole way down. The structure that's joining them together is called the linea alba, and it used to be on your list of structures to see, and the reason why it's so important to know is that without the linea alba, you cannot create this sort of bilateral distribution of musculature in the body. Let's take a look at that pectoralis major. You'll see on one side, it's attached to the rib cage at the sternum and the clavicle, okay? And you can see that it's going to come over here, but on this part, you're going to see that it's been reflected out of the way, so you can see the deep muscles that we don't even have you think about a whole lot. Until we come down here, take a look at that rectus abdominis. If we cut into it, you have a transverse abdominis and you have an internal oblique. And this is what they're saying you're working out when you're actually trying to activate your entire core. Now to finish this up, I want to go back to what's going on here. Okay, so if all of those muscles have been put together, remember we're going to have to activate them, so what I'm going to teach you is materials inside here, and these materials are, noticed down there, little purple dots are calcium, and calcium is going to regulate when sarcomeres actually work. Okay, so I'm going to shorten the distance between 2 points while this is happening. So it means every single one of the muscles, you're going to see the other parts of the list in a moment, every single one of those muscles, okay, will contract for a period of time, again, pulling on that endomysium. Remember I drew it in blue a moment ago, so I'll draw it again. So the endomysium, okay, coming all the way around. And then we're going to bundle them together in this thing that's called the perimysium. Okay, probably should change the color for you so it makes it less confusing. It shouldn't go underneath like that. That's just my bad drawing. And then you actually have the endomysium sitting, wrapping the whole thing together. And remember, if it's on one side, it's the origin and the insertion, okay, to actually pull on these. So what are the other muscles then? Let's get rid of the cartoon. Let's put this one here. And you'll see this is the second half of your table. And let's just pick up, I don't know, let's take one that's going to be really hard for you to find. And let's say that's going to be here. That's going to be your ilios. So you're going to have to go into your textbook and you're going to have to figure out how this actually works. It's what's responsible for, say, attaching the lower part of the body to the upper part of the body, your legs to your trunk, if you will. You're going to need to do some digging to figure out how that one works. These are really simple. Biceps, triceps, palmaris. These are superficial muscles. Okay, and you're going to see that flex the forearm, extends the forearm, and flexes the hand. Now, something that might be a little bit more difficult to see will be all of these guys here. Okay, you have to break apart who's anterior, who's posterior, and they even made the list even shorter these days. Okay, so if these guys are grouped together posteriorly, these guys are anterior, and all they're telling you is what they're doing. Extends leg, flexes leg. In an ideal world, I would have you learn more, go back into the textbook and figure out what's going on. But I realize, being away from the school, not being able to see these things so straightforward, it might be a little bit more difficult. So what I would do is, let's get rid of that. Let's go here. And just to begin, make sure you can find, hey, there's the triceps brachii right there, right? So let's get this going. So there's your triceps brachii, there's your biceps brachii. Some of the easy ones or interesting ones aren't even on these lists anymore. There's your gluteus maximus. Here's the, let's see, palmaris longus. We got it on here? It's not on this one, it's on the previous one. Here is your gastroc right here. And then back here, one thing to remember, and this is really important, when you're learning the legs of the muscles and arms, you need to remember who's right and who's left, right? And having done that, what you need to make sure you do is you need to make sure you also understand that these are mirror images. So who's ever on the inside here, say gracilis here, you're going to see gracilis in the exact same location as a mirror image. Okay, so you got to remember when you're learning it, what leg am I looking at? What arm am I looking at? Okay. Well, that's it for now. I spoke a couple minutes longer than I really wanted to, and hopefully you get this idea of how we're going to be thinking about muscles inside this class. And remember, you'll notice they've all attached to all of the bones you've had to learn. Okay, have a great day, and hang in there, folks.